Welcome back to Mystic Recaps. Spoiler alert, things are about to get shady. Don't say we didn't warn you. The movie opens in a dimly lit building where money changes hands faster than a hot potato. Our main man, Vincent, has a gun to someone's head while another gun is pointed right back at him. Talk about a standoff. As Vince waits for the perfect moment to shoot, we're taken back 4 days earlier to Ohio, where Vince is dealing with some serious family drama. Vince's pops is in the hospital after an accident, and the medical bills are piling up faster than we can say cha-ching. So what's a guy to do? Sell the family house, of course. Between hospital visits, Vince works as an electrician, and on this particular day, he's got a client named Mr. Harrison. The catch: Harrison is being spied on by a cop, and he's clueless about it. When Harrison receives a mysterious letter promising riches beyond his wildest dreams, Vince overhears and smells trouble brewing. And boy, is he right. Vince returns home to celebrate his little sister's birthday, and she wishes for a lamb of her own. How quaint. Meanwhile, across the country, Jasper Baggas meets with some questionable characters who lend him a cool $2 million, with the expectation of him returning $3 million within 3 days. Talk about a high-stakes loan. The next day at the hospital, Vince receives news that his father needs yet another operation, which will only make their debt situation worse. The hits just keep on coming. Later at work, Vince overhears Mr. Harrison boasting to a friend about a special job that will pay him a hefty sum in a single day. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? As it turns out, Mr. Harrison has attempted this job before, relying purely on luck, and the memories still haunt him. After his friend departs, Mr. Harrison retreats to his room for some me time, but ends up accidentally overdosing. Looks like luck was not on his side this time. Sometime later, after the cops have asked Vince all the important questions, he's finally allowed to leave. Just before he makes a quick exit, Vincent decides to make a pit stop at Mr. Harrison's desk to swipe a mysterious envelope. The envelope contains a train ticket to New York and a CPS receipt for pickup, because who needs morals when you've got a free ride to the Big Apple, right? At the post office, Vincent hands over his ID and receives a package containing a phone, some cash, a key, and a letter with a spidery logo. Sounds like the start of a horror movie. The letter includes instructions telling him to only use the provided phone, use the money for the hotel, and not go rogue. Back at home, Mr. Harrison's girlfriend becomes suspicious and calls the police about the missing envelope. Detectives soon discover that Vincent has picked up the package and decide to follow him. The investigation is transferred to a sturdy officer by the name of Mullane. The following morning, Vincent is strutting down the platform in his best suit, heading to New York City, oblivious to the fact that he's got a tail. He checks into the hotel as instructed and waits for further orders like a good little soldier. In the middle of the night, Vincent gets a call on his new phone from an unknown number, which he answers pretending to be Harrison. It's like playing dress up with a phone. The mystery caller gives Vincent some new instructions, which he follows without question the next day, because who needs free will anyway? So, Vince heads over to the Postnet store by Grand Central, uses his key to open a PO box, and finds yet another train ticket, a tiny piece of cork with the number 13 on it, and even more instructions. Vince's destination is Macomb, but he's got to get off one stop before. Vince later meets an inspector on the train, who asks for his ticket and proceeds to rat him out to the cops. But their efforts do not bear any fruit as Vince manages to get a few precious minutes ahead of the cops by getting off the train earlier and taking a cab to the outskirts of town. Soon enough, another car pulls up with a certain someone named Jack behind the wheel. Vince and Jack compare their little cork pieces, both with the number 13 on them, and then Jack calls Vince over, grabs the phone, and drives him away. The cops and Detective Mullane arrive just seconds too late after asking the cabbie to take them there. If only they had better timing. But alas, there are no clues to be found. Meanwhile, Jack takes Vince to an old shack in the middle of the forest. 2 men there inspect Vince's old clothes, making sure he hasn't stashed anything. It's like Vince is stuck in a real-life version of a choose-your-own-adventure book. The goons also take it upon themselves to perform some impromptu shoe surgery, giving Vince a new look and a bad limp. After that, they chauffeur him over to a grandiose mansion that could give the White House a run for its money. There, Vince meets Joe, the wealthy bigwig who can't be fooled by Vince's impersonation. So, Vince tells Joe the truth, that he's a phony stand-in for the real Harrison, who's sadly 6 feet under, and Joe begrudgingly lets him play along. Meanwhile, in the basement, the betting is at an all-time high. Jasper makes a grand entrance and wagers on his prized horse, number 6, while Joe puts his faith in Vince, who's been given the unlucky number 13. The game everyone's putting their money on. Russian roulette, baby. Vince and the other participants don black tees with their numbers, take a bullet each, and point their weapons at each other, waiting for the arachnid-adorned light bulb to signal the start. If you survive, you move on to the next round. Easy peasy, right? It's time to put those reflexes to the test. The tension is high, the danger is palpable, and Vince's odds of survival are looking as grim as the mood in the room. Will he make it to the next round? Or will he be a goner faster than a cheap pack of smokes? Only time, and the trigger finger of the person behind him, will tell. Vince, who is more jittery than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, seeks Jack's assistance to load his gun. With a flicker of hope, Vince gets ready, and then the light bulb glows and a few men bite the dust. But the game's not over yet. Vince, who has been sweating bullets, still hasn't pulled the trigger. To make matters worse, security marches over and threatens to turn Vince into a Swiss cheese if he doesn't follow the rules. With all the fortitude he can muster, Vince eventually pulls the trigger, and miraculously, the guy standing in front of him lives to see another day. This marks the end of round 1. So, Joe takes Vince aside and gives him a pep talk, telling him to grow a pair. And because there's no harm in making a quick buck, Joe begins taking bets from the audience members whose men didn't make the cut. Meanwhile, Patrick Jefferson, participant number 17, strikes a deal with his patron Jimmy, offering to pay him 50 times more if he can escape. Jimmy questions why Jefferson, who's already loaded, would sign up for such a deadly competition. Jefferson tells him a sob story about being locked up in a box for 2 whole days after being wrongly incarcerated. But Jimmy is as heartless as a stone and refuses to lend a helping hand. Jasper, the loving brother, puts a little extra cash on his sibling Ronald Lindbagus, fresh out of the loony bin, to be his champion. The second round kicks off, but this time with 2 bullets in every gun. Somehow Vince manages to cheat death and make it through, but the guy behind him wasn't as lucky. Number 16 makes a surprise comeback, only to be put down like a rabid dog by security. Seeing this, poor Hans has a mental breakdown, and his motivational speaker patron is about as useful as a wet blanket in a thunderstorm. Meanwhile, Jefferson spills the beans to Jimmy about his shady past, including a stint in the slammer for robbing a truck. He's got a treasure map to the loot, and if he bites the dust, he wants Jimmy to pick up where he left off. Talk about trust issues. Jimmy gets offered a deal that would make Robin Hood proud, keep half the money and send the other half to Jefferson's jailbird son. Jasper, meanwhile, is having flashbacks to the time he busted his own brother out of the loony bin, only for him to stop taking his meds and go off the rails. By now things are really heating up, and not in a good way. Ronald, who's been off his meds for a while, is getting more and more agitated, and his aim is starting to show it. When Jasper draws his number, Ronald goes full on Hulk mode and tries to smash Vince's head with an ashtray. Luckily, Jasper manages to keep things from going full-blown Thunderdome. Round 3 starts and the contestants are starting to show the strain. Hans gets a shot of morphine to calm his nerves, and number 3 needs a damn chair just to keep up. Meanwhile, Ronald is still on the warpath, provoking Vince and generally being a pain in the ass. Things take a violent turn and not the good kind. Ronald slaps Vince and almost pushes him over the edge, but the host intervenes just in time. This round is where the rubber meets the road. Each player gets 3 bullets, and the stakes couldn't be higher. At the end of the round, 5 players make it through: Vince, Jefferson, Ronald, number 3, and number 9. This marks the time for the final showdown, the duel. A bunch of rap balls are thrown on the table like they're on a first date. 2 are black, and 3 are white, probably feeling left out. The patrons of the remaining players each pick a ball, and those who grab the black ones get to duel it out. Jasper and Joe, the lucky devils, nab the black balls, so Vince gets stuck with Ronald. Tough luck, Vince. Jasper, being the experienced player, receives most of the new bets. Joe, on the other hand, is trying to convince Schlondorf to bet on Vince because, hey, their chance is 5-1, which means more money. Meanwhile, Jimmy's reminding Jefferson he can finally collect his winnings and go. But when Jefferson gets distracted while changing, Jimmy decides to get a little stabby. Good thing security breaks up the party before things get too messy. Jefferson breathes a sigh of relief that he's still among the living. He curses Jimmy's name and mocks him for believing tall tales. And to add insult to injury, Jefferson reveals that the blank piece of paper Jimmy was after was just a decoy and that he still has the real map. Jefferson burns it like he's the last surviving member of the paper burning club and then finally makes his exit. On the other end, Ronald unleashes his inner bully and proceeds to insult Jasper, demanding his cut of the winnings. Ronald's got some beef with Jasper, and it's not just because he's a vegetarian. Apparently, Jasper spent the money their parents gave him to care for Ronald by putting him in a mental institution, only taking him out for the occasional death match. This is when we flash back to the beginning of the story as it's time for the final showdown. Each player is given 3 bullets, and they stare each other down like 2 cowboys in an old western duel. But when they finally pull the trigger, luck is on their side, and neither of them bites the bullet. Undeterred, they load an extra bullet and try again. This time, Ronald isn't so lucky and he takes his final bow. The winner, of course, is none other than Vince. Schlondorf congratulates himself on his risky bet, while Jasper is busy mourning the loss of his brother. But the real tragedy is Vince, who has to live with the guilt of killing someone. The final prize is a whopping $1,850,000. The man who hands Vince the money calls him lucky, but we all know that Ronald's undefeated record was no match for Vince's beginner's luck. Schlondorf and Joe shower Vince with praise and offer him a ride to the train station. Vince plays along, but as soon as he gets upstairs to grab his belongings, he makes a swift exit through the window, much to Jack's disappointment. Joe, on the other hand, seems as if he couldn't care less. Fast forward to a few hours later, Vince has made it to the train station, only to be spotted by the same taxi driver who took him there the day before. This prompts the driver to call the cops and give them Vince's location. Talk about a snitch move. Fortunately, Vince spots the police cars in the distance and has the presence of mind to hide his money bag in a nearby trash can before they catch him. A few tense moments later, Vince finds himself in a police station, being grilled by a detective about the money, but he decides not to spill the beans. Vince keeps his cool and spins a tall tale about being left in the middle of the forest to be killed because he wasn't Harrison. The detective looks skeptical, so Vince doubles down and shows Detective Mullane his damaged shoes, claiming that the crooks who robbed him were the reason he's now going to need new footwear. He's happy to ID the perpetrators for Mullane, but won't be able to lead him to the drop spot, as they had blindfolded him. Mullane, with no options left, has to let him go. Vince takes a cab to the trash can location to retrieve his cash, only to find his bag gone. But wait, there's hope. He spots fresh trash bags behind the building. Like a raccoon rummaging through garbage, he tears open each one until he hits pay dirt. Crisis averted. For now, Vince realizes he can't chance another attack, so he decides to mail his loot to his family via registered post. He's still not off the hook yet, though. He takes a moment to call his mom and inform her of the upcoming delivery so they can arrange to have someone sign for it. Then he hops on a train, hoping for the best. In the next scene, Vince wakes up from his hotel stay with a raging case of the munchies. He stumbles into the grocery store to grab some snacks but ends up blowing $100 on a lamb plushie that reminds him of his sister. Vince leaves and goes to the train station, hopping on a train to Ohio. But when the train makes a pit stop, in walks Jasper, the friendliest murderer you'll ever meet. Jasper decides to rob Vince, mistaking the plushie for a bag of cash. So he shoots him and runs away with the bag. Vince, unfortunately, meets his untimely demise at the hands of Jasper, but not before swallowing a post office receipt. Looks like the lesson here is to never trust a stranger on a train, especially if they're armed and have a thing for plushies. Rest in peace, Vince. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content like this. Until next time.